Today, India is producing unicorns. On one side, startups are raising millions of dollars. On the other side, nearly 80 crore Indians are still dependent on the government for basic food assistance. On one side, founders chase valuation. On the other side, communities are just chasing survival. So the real question is, can entrepreneurship solve India's deepest problems, or is it only creating new billionaires? What do you think are they doing different as compared to other enterprises that are trying but failing? Thing that I would think about is funding.
On one side, you don't get support from the traditional investor. On the other side, you don't get support from the donors. Then, how do you succeed? See, what matters is having right. So until and unless you have this, you won't be able to be a social entrepreneur. Yes, it is profitable space, but
Ladies and gentlemen, today on the Cognoscenti, we decode the future of social entrepreneurship with Professor Pradeep Hota, who is a leading academic voice on social entrepreneurship and sustainable enterprise. Professor Hota, welcome to the Cognoscenti. So, you have interacted with a lot of students across various campuses and in general.
right.
So, when you see the environment among them, their interest in startups, their interest in jobs, career, how would you put their inclination towards social entrepreneurship or social causes in general?
Something which is quite interesting to see nowadays is people tend to believe that social enterprises are like NGOs, right? So they think that we can't have a great career if we are getting into social entrepreneurship. So they think only corporate will give us the better opportunity.
So, if we have to make it clear for our audience, how would we put the difference between social entrepreneurship and NGOs?
So there are, two reasons, or there are two factors that make a social enterprise a social enterprise. The first one is the reason for existence, and that should be social, right? So many times people argue that Reliance Jio provided us free net for multiple years, right? Is it a social enterprise? Now, it is not a social enterprise because the reason for existence is not social, it was something else. So there was a business model behind it for which Jio was established. The second factor that makes a social enterprise, that reason is the revenue generation mechanism. So until and unless you have a revenue generating mechanism, we cannot call you social enterprise.
Okay.
So NGOs typically they do not have a revenue generating mechanism, whereas a social enterprise must have one. So that's where they have a difference.
So, what would we say revenue generating mechanism is? Because we need revenue in general for everything
Right.
to run any organization or institution or a company.
Yes.
So, how would we put it?
See, NGOs, of course, they need funds to run their program, but they are charity driven, right? As an NGO, you don't have to generate your own revenue. So you don't have to, for example, go for trading activities. You don't have to sell anything, buy anything. You can just take funds and then use that fund for some of your projects. So that's the revenue part.
If social enterprise would be profitable, then wouldn't the profit maximizing firms, the commercial firms, wouldn't they already have solved them? What makes social entrepreneurship different than commercial entrepreneurship?
I think what you asked is pretty valid question, that if it is profitable, why don't we see all these commercial organizations getting into this space, right? Yes, it is profitable space, but if you are a social enterprise, the profit cannot be taken by the founder. Right? So as a social entrepreneur, whatever profit you get from the business, it has to be reinvested into the business. Now, the typical commercial entrepreneurs, they will not do this because their goal is to take profit out of the business and use it for some other purpose.
Okay.
And then the moment they start doing it, they will no longer remain social enterprises. So they are even not allowed to take profit out of the social enterprise and utilize for their own purpose. And I think because of that reason, many commercial enterprises, they are not entering into this space.
Okay. So the investors, CEOs, and these people, they cannot take the profits out.
Yes, you are not supposed to take the profit out of the business. The profit has to be reinvested into the scaling up of the business.
Or a person's incentive to be an entrepreneur or work in general is to earn money, and majority of the people are driven by that goal. So how would you say like a mindset of a social entrepreneur is, and how do we as Gen Zs move from thinking about money and becoming a commercial entrepreneur to even thinking about a social entrepreneurship setup where it's mainly feeding into social causes and not because we cannot take out the money, right?
Yeah.
So
See, what matters is having empathy, right? So, as a social entrepreneur, we talk about empathy. That means your ability to understand others' the problem, and then you try to help them. So until and unless you have this empathy in your mind, you won't be able to be a social entrepreneur. So you must understand that if you want to be a social entrepreneur, that empathy has to be there. If it is not there, unfortunately, we don't have it. Of course, nowadays, different institutions are trying to, promote social entrepreneurship in various ways, right? But it's my belief that until and unless somebody has that core element of empathy within them, it is very difficult to make them social entrepreneur.
so Professor Hota, where would we say India stands in comparison to other countries globally? Where does it stand in terms of social entrepreneurship?
Okay, very good question. See, India, fortunately, in the space of social entrepreneurship, India is doing pretty good. The requirement in India is huge.
Yeah, it's a developing country.
It's a developing country, so we need a lot of social enterprises, and that's why probably we have many of them. Right? To talk about some of the Indian social enterprises which are globally recognized. One of them would be Arvind Eye Care, which is in Madurai. Right?
Okay.
Now, Arvind Eye Care as a social enterprise is possibly one of the finest example of how you can balance between your social mission as well as your revenue generation.
Okay.
So Arvind Eye Care is not a charitable organization, it's not an NGO, but it generates its own revenue, and then it provides free treatments to millions of people around India. Similarly, there is another example, if I can give, which is of Selco. So Selco is in the space of providing solar lights, and they operate with the model where they generate their own revenue and then they fund their operation through their profits from the business. So these are a few examples of Indian social enterprises.
So, talking about these successful social enterprises like Selco and Arvind Eye Care, what do you think are they doing different as compared to other enterprises that are not as successful as them or are trying but failing? So, what exactly is it that is making them so successful?
Okay, so we have several social enterprises. They start with all noble cause. As I told you, it all starts with the empathy of the social entrepreneur, and there are many who start, but most of them typically they do not succeed. Right? The primary reason for the organizations which are so successful is that they have been able to figure out a successful business model, whereas others they are still struggling with a right kind of business model which might work for them. So you have to understand that as a social enterprise, you are you have more challenges to deal as compared to a commercial enterprise,
Right.
because you do not have access to the so-called equity investors, right? Angel
Okay.
investors and all, because they look for ROI, and as a social enterprise, you cannot promise them to give the ROI figure which a commercial startup can give.
Are you allowed to provide them
Of course, if
dividends?
they are investors,
Okay.
certain percentage you will be able to provide them, but then you won't be able to provide them the ROI number which a typical commercial organization will give. So naturally, that space is not there for you, right?
Okay.
On the other side, it is very difficult for a social enterprise to get donations and CSR money, because they also generate revenue. So in that sense, you are stuck in the middle. Right? On one side, you don't get support from the traditional investor. On the other side, you don't get support from the donors. Then how do you succeed? And that's where most of the social enterprises they fail to figure out a successful business model, right? Because you have to figure out a business model which will not only address the social cause but also help you to generate revenue to at least to self sustain.
So, how do we think that Arvind Eye Care is able to do that?
So what Arvind has done differently is, they have made themselves extremely efficient. So in that way, they have reduced the cost. Right? To give you an example, on an average, one doctor in Arvind Eye Care probably treats 5 or 10 times more number of patients than a doctor in other eye hospitals. So and then of course efficiency in all the processes. So they have become so efficient. They have reduced the cost, and also the model with which Arvind Eye Care works is what we call a cross subsidization model.
Okay.
So there are large number of people who go to Arvind Eye Care because of the high quality of treatment, and they are ready to pay, right? And that money is utilized to provide subsidized treatment to a lot of people. So they have been able to figure out this model which is called cross subsidization business model.
So, is there any interesting emerging startups in the field of social entrepreneurship that are doing a great work or you would like to talk about?
So we work very closely with one organization called Drishti. Their latest initiative is, they want to create a self-sustainable villages, in the sense that, in a village, there are a lot of items which are produced within, right? And, money from the villagers, typically when they buy products from outside, it goes out of the village. So their goal is, can we make a system where we can promote something called barter system, and then this will also increase interdependence, so naturally it will lead to more socially cohesive villages. So this is the goal for which they are working on, and this is something really exciting for me.
Do you think they can also turn this to something related to tourism? People can come for a month or 2 month or 6 month vacation where they could be a part of that village and live in that environment, and from that they can generate revenue.
Yep, this is possible, but I think their focus is pretty different. They
Uh,
are mostly now focusing on the other part of, which is first creating that you know village level self-reliant ecosystem, and possibly once the ecosystem is developed, something like what you suggested can be done.
so, will this be like pushing boundaries of social entrepreneurship towards commercial entrepreneurship, or because it is kind of moving to focusing on revenue generation?
Again, revenue generation is not a bad thing. I
Okay.
would say, as a social entrepreneur or social enterprise, if you cannot generate revenue,
Hmm.
then how do you scale up your operation?
True.
So revenue generation per se is not a bad thing.
Hmm.
Only when the revenue generation, for the sake of revenue generation, you start exploiting people, that becomes bad, right? You would have heard about what happened to the microfinance domain in India,
Hmm.
also, in some places globally, right? So microfinance was started to provide village women with micro loans so that they can start a small business, right? And it was in a joint liability group concept, where a set of women used to come together, 8 or 10, and then they used to take some funds from microfinance organizations, and then start their business. Can you guess what would be the interest some of them were charging? The upper side? Any guess?
So interestingly, this was mentioned in our 8th, 9th grade textbook, we would say, and it was mentioned in a very positive note, saying that it would be just 8 to 9%. I don't remember the statistics honestly, but it was in a very positive way.
I would not say that everybody is bad. Right? So there are, of course, some microfinance organizations which have done extremely well in terms of helping people, but some of them, even they have interest rates like 40-45%, which is too huge. Right?
That is a lot.
Yeah, that is so a lot of exploitation, and that's where the problem of revenue generation comes. So revenue generation for your self sustainability is perfectly fine, but when greed becomes the priority, this kind of problem happens, and that's where social enterprises, I don't think they should get into this domain.
True. Okay, Professor, now that you're in your mid career, let's say you are 20 again. Right now, suddenly something happened, some magic happened, and now
I
you're,
wish.
yeah, now you're 20 years old. So, and now you're given an option that either you could go become an entrepreneur, go into social entrepreneurship, or take up a job in any field you want. So, what would you choose?
I wish I can become 20 years old again so that I can create a social enterprise unicorn. Right? Maybe the first social enterprise unicorn of India. That's my
So,
goal.
what fields would you target?
In commercial entrepreneurship class, in my course, I have 2 sessions dedicated for idea generation. The reason is it is very difficult for you to find an entrepreneurial ideas. Whereas in the space of social entrepreneurship, there are n number of opportunities which are available. Right? you look around you and you will have so many problems. So rather than thinking about how do I deliver something in 15, 20, 25 minutes, why don't you think about there are millions kids who do not go to school, right, who do not get quality education. Can I do something about them?
True.
So I think that's where youngsters nowadays they should start thinking about.
Yeah, like rather than focusing on what would make our life more luxurious, or people whose life are actually pretty easy and pretty comfortable. Rather than focusing on that, if youngsters looked around and thought about people whose life is very hard, or they are barely living, let's say, like towns where there's water shortage, there's people dying because of hunger, because of no treatment. So if they start shifting from there to problems like pre-existing problems related to necessities, then we can say that they can think about social entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
That's where empathy comes
absolutely.
into play. And what are the next steps that I would take? I would do ideation. I would Next thing that I would think about is funding.
Okay. See, there are fortunately we have now a lot of sources for social entrepreneurs. Um, the government of India has a lot of schemes where if you are working on some social cause, there are ways in which government provides you support. Actually. But that's one part of it. We have a lot of investors whom we call impact investors.
Okay.
Now we have several impact investors in India as well as globally who are ready to support this kind of cause. So they are investors. So in that sense, they look for ROI, but their expectation is pretty moderate. That means they understand that they want you to work in social space. So that means they know that you won't be able to giving them ROI numbers equivalent to what a commercial startup is going to give them, and they are okay with it. That's why they are impact investors, right? So they are ready to invest for the cause, right? Now all these things are possible. Only thing you have to figure out again is a good business model. You can devise a business model, then rest of the things I think is quite easy.
So, do you think there is problems with awareness about social entrepreneurship for our generation?
Of course, I think more and more podcasts like this will certainly help, right? Because they don't understand what a social enterprise is. So they most of them they think it's NGO, and they say that if NGO is there, what kind of future opportunities we have. Let me give you one very interesting example. Right? So there is a social enterprise in Mumbai, and that social enterprise it started about 2012 2013, and 2016 they were invited at the time US President Obama to go and meet him for one of the one of the seminar which was going on. And now you tell me, if you are a commercial entrepreneur, right, how much time it will take you to reach to that stage where you will be invited by the US president. So that's the power of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, which unfortunately most of the youngsters they are not aware of.
Professor Hota, thank you so much for joining us in this podcast. I hope the discussion that we had today reaches out to a big audience and creates some impact. I hope Gen Z is now more educated and knows more about social entrepreneurship and is motivated to step into this field. Thank you so much.
Thank
we
you.
hope we have more discussions like this in the future.
Thank you.